The Zurich Empire's command center was always a place of order. The officers moved with precision, their tentacle-like arms gliding over glowing control panels. The air smelled of metal and energy fields. Everything was under control until the alarms began to scream. General Vauxhall snapped his head toward the main screen. A flashing red icon appeared, pulsing like a heartbeat. Something was moving toward their territory at an incredible speed. His eyes narrowed as he tapped a command into his console. The screen zoomed in. A single ship, massive, silent, and it was heading straight for them. "Report," Vauxhall barked. His voice was rough, edged with irritation. The Zurich Empire ruled this sector of space. No ship entered without permission. Whoever this was, they had made a terrible mistake. A younger officer, Lieutenant Acceleris, quickly checked the data. His greenish skin paled. His tendrils twitched nervously. "Sir, it's a Terran warship." A dead silence filled the command center. Every Zurich officer stopped what they were doing. Their eyes locked onto the screen. "A Terran warship," Vauxhall repeated slowly, as if the words tasted bitter. The Zurich and the humans had never fought an open war, but everyone knew the stories. Humans were dangerous. They had risen from a weak, primitive world and survived against impossible odds. Unlike most species, they never surrendered. They adapted. They fought until they won. And now, one of their warships was heading straight for Zurich space without warning. "Are they sending a transmission?" Vauxhall demanded. Lieutenant Acceleris checked again. His voice trembled. "No, sir. They are completely silent." That made no sense. All ships announced themselves before entering restricted space. Was this an attack? A test? A mistake? "Scan their weapons," Vauxhall ordered. The data appeared instantly. The results made his throat tighten. "They're armed, heavily armed," Acceleris whispered. "But their weapons are offline." Vauxhall's mind raced. This warship wasn't acting aggressively, yet it wasn't hiding either. It moved forward fearlessly, as if it didn't care who was watching. That was unnerving. "Size comparison?" Vauxhall asked. The next answer made his stomach sink. "It's 4 times the size of our destroyers," Acceleris replied. Murmurs spread across the command center. Some officers exchanged nervous glances. Others whispered in low voices. The Zurich were an old and powerful empire, but this single Terran ship, it was huge. "Do they not know where they are?" a senior officer asked. Vauxhall shook his head. "No, humans were not foolish. If they were here, they had a reason." "What are your orders, General?" Acceleris asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Vauxhall clenched his jaw. "Send out a warning. Now." The Zurich communication officers worked quickly. A sharp electronic pulse was transmitted through space. The message was clear. "Unidentified Terran vessel, you are entering restricted space. Turn back immediately or face consequences." Seconds passed. The command center was silent. Every officer stared at the screen, waiting for a response. Nothing came. Vauxhall's fingers tightened into a fist. The humans were ignoring them. "Send it again," he growled. The message was repeated. Louder. Stronger. Still. Nothing. Vauxhall's tendrils twitched with anger. This was a direct challenge. "Sir," Acceleris said hesitantly, "they are still moving forward. No change in course." That was the final insult. Vauxhall slammed his fist onto the command table. "Deploy the fleet. Stop them. Now." Across the system, Zurich warships powered up. Engines roared. Plasma cannons hummed with energy. 20 warships took formation, blocking the Terran vessel's path. They aimed their weapons. Another warning was sent. Still, the Terran ship did not slow down. It was like watching a storm roll in, silent, unstoppable, inevitable. For the first time in his long career, General Vauxhall felt something cold creep into his chest. Was this a mistake? Or were they about to anger something far more powerful than they realized? The Zirek warships formed an unbreakable wall in the darkness of space, their sleek hulls reflecting the distant light of a dying star. Weapons primed, engines humming with controlled aggression, they stood as the Empire's first and strongest line of defense. Yet, despite their overwhelming numbers, there was an unease creeping through the fleet. Inside the flagship's command center, General Voktal's eyes remained fixed on the massive Terran warship. It continued its path, undeterred by the fleet blocking its way. No transmissions, no hesitation, no acknowledgement of their presence, as if the Zirek warships did not matter at all. Status of their shields, Voktal asked, trying to maintain his composure. Zellerez, his nervous lieutenant, checked the readings. His voice cracked. "Sir, their shields are down." A ripple of disbelief spread through the bridge. What? Voktal turned sharply. That made no sense. Entering enemy-controlled space with shields down. That was beyond arrogance. It was madness. It was an invitation to be destroyed. "Confirm the readings," he ordered. A few tense moments passed before the answer came. "Confirmed, General. Their shields remain inactive. They are wide open." Voktal's jaw clenched. This was not how warships behaved. A vessel of that size should have had its defenses raised the moment it detected another fleet. This was something else. A statement. A challenge. Or perhaps a trap. He narrowed his gaze. What about their weapons? No sign of activation. Zellerez reported. They are fully armed, but not powered. Another silence. The Zirek officers exchanged uneasy glances. The entire situation defied reason. Who in their right mind entered enemy space without raising shields or activating weapons? It was either the greatest act of confidence or the greatest bluff in history. The fleet's captains, waiting for orders, began hailing the flagship one by one. "General, do we fire? Should we engage? They are unshielded. This is our chance." Voktal's fingers hovered over the command panel. A single order could erase the Terran vessel from existence. A coordinated barrage from the Zirek fleet would tear through its hull before it could react. It would never reach their borders. But something about it felt wrong. "Hold your fire," Voktal said, his voice low. The captains hesitated. "Sir, we are warriors, not executioners," he snapped. "If this ship wanted war, we would already be under attack." Voktal stared at the warship, its massive structure looming against the backdrop of endless space. Why aren't they doing anything? Then, for the first time since its arrival, the Terran vessel moved, not in its course, but in its form. Panels along its hull began to shift. Sections of armor slid apart, revealing hidden compartments that pulsed with faint blue light. It was slow, deliberate. Not a weapon charge, something else. Zelleraz's breath hitched. "Sir, we're detecting energy fluctuations within the ship." Voktal straightened. "Explain." "It's not a weapon signature," Zellerez said quickly. His fingers flew over the controls. It's something else. A type of energy we've never seen before." The bridge dimmed for a moment as data feeds surged, displaying readings that made no sense. The energy output was off the charts, far beyond anything even the Zirek Empire had ever encountered. Then, a pulse. A single deep, resonating pulse. It echoed through the fleet's communication channels, though no words were spoken. No language. No demand. Just a signal. A feeling. The Zirek officers shuddered. Their skin tingled. Even through the cold void of space, something about that pulse felt alive. And then, a message appeared on their screens. Simple, untranslated, but terrifyingly clear. "We are watching." For the first time in his long military career, General Voktal felt something he never expected to feel in battle. Doubt. Because if this warship was what it seemed to be, then the Zirek Empire was not the hunter. They were the prey. A heavy silence hung over the Zirek fleet. The message remained on every screen, glowing with an unnatural light. "We are watching." General Voktal's breathing was steady, but his mind was racing. The warship still floated in place, its shields down, weapons offline. Yet it radiated a presence, a force that could not be measured in firepower alone. On the bridge, the officers barely moved. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Others pretended to be busy with their stations, as if avoiding eye contact with the message would make it disappear. Finally, Voktal broke the silence. "Has the ship changed its course?" Celeraz checked the readings. His voice was dry. "No, General. They remain on their current path, straight toward our home system." Voktal's mandibles tightened. The Empire had stood for centuries, undefeated in battle. Their fleet was the largest in the quadrant. And yet, a single Terran warship was advancing as if none of that mattered. "We cannot let them pass," one of the captains spoke over the comms. "This is a test, General. If we allow them to continue, we show weakness." "And if we fire first?" Voktal asked, his tone unreadable. The captain hesitated. "Then, we show strength." Voktal studied the warship on the main display. Strength. Did they even know what they were dealing with? A warrior's first lesson was to understand his enemy before striking. And yet, nothing about this ship made sense. Even now, it made no attempt to communicate. No demands. No threats. Only that message. "We are watching." Watching what? Voktal exhaled slowly. "Prepare a transmission. Open all channels." Celeraz nodded and tapped at his console. "Channel open, General." Voktal stepped forward, his voice firm. "Unidentified Terran vessel, you are in restricted space. Identify yourself and state your purpose. Failure to comply will be considered an act of aggression." The bridge fell silent. The message was sent, and the warship remained silent. Seconds passed, then a full minute. Celeraz whispered, no response. A cold sensation crawled up Voktal's spine. Then, movement. The warship shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But every Zirek officer felt it. A shift in presence, not position. Then the energy signature changed. Celeraz gasped. "Sir, we're detecting." A pulse. The same deep, resonating pulse as before. But this time, it was not a simple message. This time, it carried something else. Voktal felt it before the computers could register it. A pressure in the air. A weight in his chest. Something primal, something beyond technology. The Zirek officers stiffened. Some grabbed the edges of their consoles, as if trying to steady themselves. Then, the ship spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in thought. A wave of understanding crashed over them. An image, a feeling, a certainty that burned into their minds. They were being tested. This was not a warship on a mission. This was a judge. The Zirek fleet was not its enemy. They were its subjects. Voktal's breath came shallow. He looked around. His crew, his hardened, battle-ready officers, looked as if they had seen something beyond reality itself. The warship had not raised its weapons. It had not spoken a threat. Yet, for the first time in his life, Voktal felt truly powerless. He steadied himself. Scan the ship again. Find out what we're dealing with. Celeraz obeyed, his claws shaking slightly as he worked the controls. A moment later, his screen filled with data. He paled. "Sir, this ship, it does not match any known Terran designs." Voktal turned slowly. "Explain." Celeraz swallowed hard. The hull composition, the internal structure, even the energy readings. This ship is impossible. A flicker of horror passed through the bridge. And then, the warship moved. For the first time since it appeared, it changed course. Not away, not around them, but straight through the heart of the Zirek fleet. The warship did not accelerate. It did not break formation. It did not attempt to avoid them. It simply moved forward, as if the Zyrek fleet did not exist. Panic spread through the comms. Captains shouted over each other. Do we fire? Should we blockade it? General. Orders. Voktal's hands clenched into fists. The warship was challenging them, not in words, but in action. It was saying, "You do not matter." And Voktal had a decision to make. Fire upon a ship that refused to acknowledge them, or let it pass, and accept what that meant. The Zyrek fleet stood frozen in space, their formations rigid but meaningless in the presence of the Terran warship. It was no longer a question of firepower or tactics. Something much deeper had been disturbed, something that not even Voktal, with all his years of experience, could fully comprehend. And yet, the warship moved, straight through their lines. Not a single turret rotated. Not a single missile locked onto the target. It was as if every Zyrek officer, every battle-hardened warrior, had been paralyzed, not by fear, but by something more alien. Voktal gritted his teeth. Status of the fleet. Zelraz's voice was unusually quiet. No one has fired, General. No one even has weapons at the ready. Voktal turned sharply. What do you mean? Zelraz swallowed, his hands hovering over the controls. Sir, I don't think they can. Voktal stepped forward, scanning the bridge. His officers, his finest warriors, stood locked in place, their gazes fixed on the massive ship gliding through their ranks. It wasn't just hesitation. It was something else. A force. A presence. Something was holding them back. The warship drifted effortlessly past the first line of defense, as if it had already judged them, and found them unworthy. The thought sent a chill through Voktal's spine. Break this spell, he growled. Override the targeting systems. Manually lock onto the ship. Zelraz's fingers moved over the console. Nothing happened. He tried again. The weapon's interface blinked. Then it flickered and died. Zelraz stepped back as if burned. Sir, our systems. Voktal rushed forward. He manually keyed in the fleet-wide command. Fire. The command vanished before it was even processed. Nothing. The Zyrek fleet, the most powerful armada in this quadrant, was defenseless. Voktal turned to the main view screen. The warship was still moving forward, its dark hull catching the distant light of the system's twin suns. What are you? He muttered. The warship did not answer. It did not acknowledge their presence. Because it didn't have to. Voktal clenched his jaw. His mind raced. The Zyrek were not cowards. If this was a battle, he would fight. But this was not a battle. This was something else. The warship continued through the fleet, heading straight for Zur Prime, the Empire's homeworld. And then it stopped, right at the edge of the planet's orbit. Voktal's breath caught in his throat. It had ignored them, overpowered them. And now, it was waiting. A message flashed on the screen. You are being measured. Every Zyrek officer on the bridge stiffened. Measured? For what? General. Zelraz's voice was barely a whisper. What if this is not an attack? Voktal turned to him sharply. Zelraz licked his lips. What if this is something worse? A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Because deep down, Voktal already knew the answer. This was not about war. This was about judgment. And the Zyrek Empire, the great undefeated conquerors of the quadrant, were standing before something that had the power to decide their fate. The warship had spoken. You are being measured. But no one knew the cost of failure. Voktal had faced death before. He had seen entire fleets reduced to wreckage, planets left smoldering under the weight of Zyrek conquest. He had led warriors into battle, fought against enemies with superior numbers, superior technology, and even those with the sheer madness to resist the Empire. But this was different. The Terran warship hung in the void, motionless, waiting. Its dark, ominous hull reflected the light of Zur Prime's twin suns, a shadow against the brilliance of the system. And then The first transmission came. A single voice. No distortion. No interference. A calm, measured tone. You are being measured. It was the same message from before. But this time, it wasn't text. It was spoken. Every officer on the bridge turned toward the speakers, their expressions frozen in shock. Voktal narrowed his eyes. The voice, it was human. Not mechanical, not synthesized. No sign of arrogance or anger. Just certainty. As if whoever was speaking already knew the outcome. Voktal's claws tightened against the armrests of his command chair. Open a channel. Tellerus hesitated. Sir, do it. The command was executed. A single tone rang through the bridge as the channel opened. Voktal stood. His voice was steady. This is General Voktal of the Zurich Empire. Identify yourself. Silence. Then, you are being measured. The exact same words. The exact same voice. Voktal's jaw clenched. What does that mean? Still, there was no answer. And then, without warning, the lights flickered. Not just on the bridge. Across the entire fleet. Every display, every console, every power source. Flickering, then failing. The bridge was plunged into darkness for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like eternity. Then, systems rebooted. Power returned. But something had changed. Xelorez gasped. Sir, the warship. Voktal turned toward the viewport, and his blood ran cold. The Terran warship was no longer outside the fleet. It was inside, right in the heart of the formation, without moving. It hadn't activated its thrusters. It hadn't jumped. It was simply there. Impossible. Voktal's claws dug into his palms. This was not technology. This was something else. The voice returned. You are being measured. And this time, it was closer. Not from the speakers. From inside the bridge. A presence. A force. Something unseen, but felt. Every Zirek warrior tensed, instincts screaming at them to react. But none of them could move. Because for the first time in their existence, they felt small. Xelorez's breathing was shallow. General. Voktal's eyes darted across the bridge, scanning for any sign of the intruder. Where are you? The voice did not answer. Instead, the warship moved again. Not forward, not backward. Everywhere. It flickered, one moment outside the fleet, the next above the planet. Then, at the same instant, it was both. As if space itself no longer applied to it. And then, the most terrifying thing of all happened. The Zirek homeworld's defense grid shut down. Every planetary cannon, every orbital shield, every automated turret. Gone. Voktal's heart pounded. This was not war. This was not an attack. This was power beyond comprehension. And they were completely at its mercy. The silence on the bridge was suffocating. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. The Zirek homeworld, the heart of their empire, now lay vulnerable, its defenses stripped away in an instant. Voktal felt his claws dig into his palms. He had spent decades in war, crushed rebellions, conquered civilizations. He had faced enemies with weapons that could shatter moons and fleets that outnumbered his own 10 to 1. But never had he faced an enemy that fought without firing a single shot. And yet, the Terran warship had already won. You are being measured. The voice echoed again, sending a ripple of unease through the bridge. But this time, it wasn't just a statement. It was a judgment. Voktal exhaled sharply, forcing his voice to remain steady. What do you want? The bridge speakers crackled. A different message appeared on the main screen. This time, it wasn't words. It was an image. A view of Zaire Prime, but not as it was now. It was a vision. The Zirek homeworld was burning. Entire cities reduced to glowing embers. Zirek warships, the pride of their fleet, lay in ruin across the surface. The great imperial palace, once the symbol of their power, was gone. But what made Voktal's breath catch in his throat was what stood in the ruins. A figure, humanoid, a Terran, draped in dark armor, standing amidst the destruction, alone. Voktal's throat tightened. Was this a threat? A prophecy? A warning? Xel'Raz's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, this isn't possible." But Voktal knew better. He had spent years crushing resistance, ensuring the Zirak remained unchallenged. And yet here now, the Terrans had done what no species ever had. They had made the Zirak afraid. The image flickered, changed. Now, Ziraprime was whole, untouched. The cities stood strong, their towers gleaming in the sun. The Imperial fleet soared proudly above, shields humming with energy. The same armored figure stood at the center. But this time, there was no destruction. Just silence. And then, one final message. Decide. Voktal's mind raced. Two futures. Two paths laid before them. One of ruin, one of survival. But the choice was not theirs alone. He turned to Xel'Raz. "Send a message to the High Council. Now." Xel'Raz hesitated. "What do we tell them?" Voktal's eyes locked onto the warship outside. It had not moved. It didn't need to. Because the message was clear. "Tell them," Voktal said slowly, "that the era of Zirak domination is over." Xel'Raz stiffened. "Sir." Voktal exhaled. He had always believed strength meant conquest. But what if true strength was knowing when to kneel? The warship remained in the void, watching, waiting. The choice had been given. And now, the fate of the Zirak Empire would be decided. The High Council chamber was deathly silent. The air was thick with tension, a suffocating weight pressing down on every Zirak official present. These were the rulers of the Empire, warlords, strategists, and politicians who had spent their entire lives ensuring the Zirak remained supreme. Yet now, they were afraid. The transmission from General Voktal played again on the massive holoscreen, his voice firm but lacking its usual confidence. "The Terrans have presented us with two futures, one of survival, one of annihilation." The words were clear, unforgiving. And for the first time in Zirak history, the High Council faced a decision they were not prepared to make. Chancellor Relvos, the oldest among them, leaned forward, his scaled fingers clasped tightly together. "This is absurd. The Terrans are a minor race. Their empire is a fraction of our size. Their numbers are insignificant compared to ours." His eyes narrowed. "And yet you claim they have already won." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. Voktal stood tall in the center of the chamber. He had fought too many battles, seen too much death, to let arrogance blind him now. "You misunderstand, Chancellor." His voice was steady. "They do not need to outnumber us. They do not need to match our firepower." He took a slow breath. "They have something else. Something we cannot counter." He turned toward the massive window behind them, looking out at Ziraprime's capital city. "They control the very laws of reality." The murmurs grew louder. Disbelief. Fear. Some even hissed in anger. Rilvo scoffed. "Magic? You expect us to believe such nonsense?" "No," Voktal said coldly. "I expect you to understand that the Terrans have already shut down our entire planetary defense grid, that their warship can move without moving, that they can be everywhere and nowhere at once." He let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "They are beyond technology, beyond war, and they are waiting." Silence. Then, the chamber lights flickered. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Some council members rose from their seats, their tails lashing in fear. Others reached for weapons instinctively, though they knew no weapon could protect them now. And then, the chamber darkened entirely. For 5 long seconds, Ziraprime itself stood blind. When the lights returned, a new message had appeared on the holoscreen. Your time is up. Every official in the chamber froze. Then a single tone echoed. A transmission. The same voice that had haunted them all. Calm. Measured. You are being measured. Voktal clenched his jaw. His claws curled into fists. They weren't just being warned. They were being judged. Chancellor Rilvos took a shaky breath, his arrogance now a distant memory. We must retaliate. Voktal turned toward him, his gaze cold. With what? Silence. Because they all knew the truth. There was nothing they could do. Nothing except make a choice. Then we surrender. A younger official finally asked, her voice trembling. Voktal's eyes flickered to the message still displayed on the holoscreen. 2 futures. 2 fates. A war that had already been won before it began. He turned back to the council and spoke the words no Zirek warrior had ever dared to utter. We kneel. Outside, the Terran warship remained, unmoving, unthreatening, because the decision had been made, and the Zirek Empire would never be the same again.